I flatlined twice in one night. Not once, twice. The first time, they brought me back in under 2 minutes, routine for a cardiac arrest at 2 a.m. The second time, I didn't want to come back. I wasn't afraid of dying. I was afraid of living, of returning to a body that had failed me once, in a life that felt, if I'm honest, already over. So when my heart stopped again and the monitor went flat and that long tone filled the room, I felt something I still can't explain to the people who love me. Relief. I was already somewhere else. Somewhere quiet. Somewhere that didn't smell like antiseptic, didn't have a nurse's voice cutting through the dark, calling a code blue. And when they got a pulse back, I wasn't grateful. I was furious, because for 11 seconds, at the edge of something I still don't have words for, I had made a decision, and someone else made it for me. This is what happened in those 11 seconds, and why, 3 years later, I still haven't forgiven the doctor who saved my life. Let me back up. 3 years ago, I was 52 years old, and by every measure that supposedly matters, I was fine. I walked most mornings. I took a statin because my doctor told me to, and mostly ignored the rest of what she said. I had a marriage that had gone quiet in the way long marriages do. Not unhappy, just worn smooth, like a stone you've held too many times to still feel its edges. I tell you this because I need you to understand. I wasn't a man waiting to die. I was a man who had simply stopped noticing he was alive. That night started like every other Tuesday, dinner at 6. The news at 7. I remember complaining about indigestion and my wife telling me to take something for it and me waving her off the way you wave off 100 small warnings before the one that matters. By 9 I was on the kitchen floor. She told me later that I made a sound she'd never heard a person make. Not a scream. Something lower. Something that didn't sound like it belonged to me anymore. She called 911 while she was already kneeling beside me, and the operator talked her through compressions on a body that, technically, had already stopped being a body that worked. I don't remember the floor. I don't remember her hands on my chest, or the neighbour who came running because he heard her screaming through the walls. What I remember starts later. And I've learned, since then, that the gap between those two memories is where the truth usually hides. The paramedics got a rhythm, back in the ambulance. First flatline, first return. Routine, they told my wife afterward, almost apologetically, like they were sorry it hadn't been more dramatic. I woke up in the ER under lights, so white they didn't feel like lighting anymore. They felt like an accusation. A nurse was cutting my shirt open. Someone was shouting numbers I didn't understand. And underneath all of it, I felt strangely, embarrassingly calm, like I was watching a show about a man having the worst night of his life, and it had only slowly started to occur to me that the man was me. They stabilized me, ran the tests, started using words like widowmaker and 95% blockage, the kind of words that are supposed to frighten you into gratitude. They wheeled me up to a cardiac unit around midnight, hooked me to a monitor, and told my wife to go home and rest. She didn't want to. I remember that much clearly. Her hand on the rail of the bed, refusing to let go until a nurse gently insisted. I told her I was fine. I want you to sit with that for a second because it matters later. I told her I was fine, and some part of me, some part I didn't have language for yet, already knew that wasn't true. Not because my heart was still failing, because something in me had already started making a decision I wouldn't fully understand until hours later. She left around 1 in the morning. I was alone in that room when it happened the second time. There was no dramatic build-up, no chest pain radiating down my arm like the pamphlets describe, just a strange, spreading cold that started in my hands and moved inward, like the room itself was leaning closer, and then a silence that had a texture to it, a silence you could have touched if silence were a thing with edges. The monitor caught it before I did. I heard the alarm change. Not louder exactly, but different. A tone I hadn't heard before, one my body seemed to recognize even though my mind hadn't caught up yet. And in the half-second before the nurses came running, before the room filled with noise and hands and someone yelling for the crash cart, I remember thinking one clear thought, the kind of thought that doesn't feel like it came from inside you at all. Not again. But it wasn't fear behind those two words. It was something closer to relief. Something closer, if I'm honest with you, to permission. And that's the part nobody prepared me for. Not the flatlining, not the second cardiac arrest in one night, which the doctors would later call, with a kind of clinical understatement only doctors seem capable of, unusual but not unprecedented. What nobody prepared me for was what came after the alarm, when the noise of the room fell away all at once like someone had turned a dial to 0. Because that's when I stopped being in that room at all. The first thing I noticed was the ceiling tile. Not heaven, not a tunnel, a water stain shaped like Florida directly above the bed that I'd been staring at for 2 days without really seeing it. Except now I was seeing it from a distance nobody should be able to see anything from somewhere near the light fixture, looking straight down at a man on a bed with wires taped to his chest and his mouth open in a way that made him look, frankly, undignified. It took me a strange, unhurried moment to understand that man was me. I want to be careful here because I know how this sounds. I know what it sounds like to say I watched 3 nurses and a resident work on my own body from a vantage point 8 feet in the air, and I know that some of you have already decided before I finish this sentence exactly what that was. Oxygen deprivation, a dying brain misfiring, generating a comforting hallucination on its way out. I used to believe that too, before I had a body to argue with. Here's what I can tell you. I heard the resident say, "We're losing him," and I heard it clearly, not muffled the way sound gets when you're groggy or sedated, but sharp, almost too sharp, like my hearing had been turned up past where it usually goes. I saw the exact moment a nurse named Priya. I didn't know her name yet, I learned it later, and getting it right became one of the small, quiet proofs I clung to afterward. I saw the exact moment she knocked a water cup off the tray table reaching for the crash cart, and I watched it roll under the bed instead of breaking. I remember thinking, with a kind of detached curiosity that still unsettles me, that's going to be a mess for someone to clean up. That's the part people don't expect. Not fear, not awe. A strange floating practicality, like I'd stepped just far enough outside my own life to finally see it clearly. And the first thing I noticed wasn't the meaning of existence. It was a spilled cup of water. Then the room began to fall away. Not dramatically, not like falling, more like watching someone slowly turn down the volume on a television while the picture keeps playing. The beeping grew distant, then faint, then gone entirely, and the fluorescent light above my body dimmed into something softer, something that didn't have a source I could point to, and I was moving. I don't know how else to describe it. There was no tunnel, no rushing wind, none of the things you've probably seen in movies. There was only a sense of travel, without a body doing the traveling, the way a thought moves from one idea to another, except the destination was a place instead of an idea. It got dark before it got light. I need you to understand that, because it matters for what comes later. There was a stretch of true darkness first. Not frightening darkness, not the kind that makes your skin crawl, but a patient darkness, the kind you'd find at the bottom of very still water. I wasn't scared in it. I was, if anything, comfortable in a way I hadn't been comfortable in my own body for years. And somewhere in that darkness, I stopped being 52. I don't mean that symbolically. I mean the weight of being 52. The mortgage, the marriage gone quiet, the £11 I'd been meaning to lose, the argument with my brother I'd been carrying since our father's funeral. All of it simply stopped being relevant. Not forgotten? Just no longer the kind of thing that mattered here, wherever here was. Then, ahead of me, or around me, or somehow both at once, a light began to gather. It wasn't blinding. That surprised me most of all. Every account I'd ever half listened to on some late-night documentary described a blinding light, and this wasn't that. It was warm and low and steady, like late afternoon sun coming through a window at the exact angle that makes dust look like something holy, and standing at the edge of it, waiting, was someone I recognized. Someone who had been dead for 11 years. I want to tell you I ran toward them. That's how it happens in the stories, isn't it? The tearful reunion, the outstretched arms. It wasn't like that. I simply stopped. I stood at the boundary of that warm light with something rising in my chest that wasn't quite joy and wasn't quite grief, but some third thing I've never had to name before or since. And I waited, the way you wait outside a door you've knocked on 1,000 times, suddenly unsure of your own hand. Because the last time I'd seen this person, I hadn't said what I needed to say. And some part of me, standing there, in that gathering light, understood with total, wordless certainty that this was the moment I'd been owed for 11 years, and that I was, finally, about to get it. It was my father. Not sick. Not the wasted, yellowed version of him I'd carried in my memory since the hospice bed. The version that had haunted every family dinner for 11 years, like a guest nobody invited but everybody kept setting a place for. This was him at maybe 60, solid, standing the way he used to stand in the garage on Saturday mornings. He didn't say my name, he just looked at me the way he used to look at me when I was young and had done something he was trying not to be proud of, and I felt 11 years of grief and anger, and everything I never got to say rise up in my throat all at once. "You weren't there," I said. It wasn't what I meant to say. It came out before I could stop it. The accusation I'd been carrying since the funeral, the one my brother and I had never fully forgiven each other for saying out loud to each other instead of to him. "I know," he said. Just that. No excuse. No explanation about the years he worked double shifts, the years he drank instead of talked, the version of fatherhood he gave us instead of the one we needed. Just, I know, offered the way you'd hand someone something heavy, You'd been meaning to give them for a long time. And something in me, some closed fist I'd been carrying in my chest since I was 14 years old, simply opened. I don't know how long we stood there. Time didn't move the way it moves here. There were things said that I still can't put into English correctly, because English wasn't really the language of it, more like understanding passed directly. The way you know your own hand is your hand without having to think the sentence, "This is my hand." He showed me things. Not visions exactly, more like memories that weren't mine folded into memories that were. My mother's face the night I was born, exhausted and radiant. A version of my father, 26 years old, terrified, in a hospital hallway, already failing at the thing he wanted most in the world to be good at. Why now, I asked him, why did it take me almost dying twice in one night for you to finally show up? And he smiled, a small, sad, knowing smile I'd never once seen on his living face. "I didn't just show up tonight," he said. "I've been here every time you needed me. You just weren't quiet enough to notice." That sentence broke something open in me that I still haven't fully closed back up, because I thought of every moment since his funeral where I'd felt a strange, sourceless calm in the middle of chaos. My daughter's difficult birth, the year I lost my job, the night before my heart attack, when I'd sat alone on the back porch for no reason I could explain, feeling watched in a way that didn't frighten me. I had explained all of it away. Coincidence, exhaustion. I hadn't been alone in any of it, and then, gently, almost apologetically, he told me something that changed the entire shape of that night. He told me it wasn't my time yet. Not with disappointment, not the way you'd expect if you've ever imagined this moment the way I used to, half joking, half hoping, at 2 a.m. when sleep wouldn't come. There was no gate, no judgment, no ledger of my sins weighed against my kindnesses. Just my father, looking at me with the specific love only a parent who has finally run out of pride can offer, telling me the door I was standing at wasn't mine to walk through. I told him no. I want you to understand what that refusal actually felt like from the inside. Because it wasn't defiance, and it wasn't despair. It was the calmest, clearest decision I have ever made in my life, clearer than my marriage, clearer than my career, clearer than any choice I'd made with 60 years to think it over. I looked at my father in that warm and steady light, and I told him that if this was the only place I could finally have him back, then I didn't want to go back to a life that had run out of urgency, back to a body that had already failed me once tonight, back to a marriage that had gone quiet and a job that had gone hollow, and a version of myself that had been sleepwalking for years before my heart ever stopped. "I'm tired," I told him. "Not sick tired, not sad tired, just finished. Let me stay." He didn't argue. That was the strangest part. He didn't tell me I was wrong or selfish, or that my wife needed me, or that my daughter wasn't done needing a father yet. He simply let the silence hold the weight of what I'd said, the way he never once knew how to do while he was alive. Then he asked me one question. Not a command, not a warning. A question offered as gently as a man like him was capable of offering anything. "Are you finished?" he said, "or are you just afraid to start again?" I didn't answer him right away. I want you to sit in that silence with me, because it was the longest silence of my life, and I have lived through some long ones. The silence after a diagnosis, The silence after a door slams and you realize the argument is over. The silence in a hospital hallway while someone else decides whether you get to keep living. None of them compare to this, because the honest answer, the true answer, the one I hadn't let myself say out loud in 3 years of half living, was both. I was finished. And I was afraid. Finished with a version of my life that had gone through the motions so long I'd forgotten I was allowed to want something different. Finished with a marriage where my wife and I passed each other in the kitchen like co-workers on a shift change, and afraid, God afraid, of what it would cost to change any of it. Afraid that if I went back and tried to build something different, I'd fail, and then I wouldn't even have the comfort of blaming circumstances anymore. It's easier to be a tired man in a quiet marriage than a man who tried to fix it and couldn't. My father watched me work through all of this without saying a word. That was new. The man I remembered never let silence sit more than a few seconds before filling it with advice or a joke or a change of subject. This version of him had learned patience the way the rest of us learn it. Too late to help anyone but the people we leave behind. You think dying is the hard part? He finally said. It isn't. Dying is easy. I did it in 11 minutes. What's hard is what you're describing right now. The part where you have to decide every single morning whether you're going to keep being the man who gave up or start becoming someone else. I don't know how, I told him. I meant it literally. I genuinely did not know how to become someone else at 52 with a marriage worn down to its studs. Neither did I, he said. That's not a secret I'm handing you like a family recipe. I'm here because I finally understand the question, and that's further than I ever got while I was alive. Then he asked me something that has not left me since, something I still turn over most nights, lying next to my wife, listening to her breathe. If you go back, he said, what is the one thing you would actually change? Not the vague thing, not I'd be more present or I'd love harder. The specific thing. The one true thing you already know and have been too tired to say. And there, in that warm and patient light, with a version of my father who had run out of time to be anything but honest, I finally said the thing I'd been carrying, unspoken, for longer than I want to admit. I would tell my wife the truth about the year I almost left. Not an affair, nothing so simple, just a year, 4 years ago, when I'd quietly decided our marriage was over, and then never told her, and instead just stayed. Let the decision dissolve back into routine, and never told her that a version of me had already left and simply never packed a bag. She didn't know that man had existed, and some nights watching her sleep, I wondered if the silence between us was really about anything I'd said, or everything I'd never had the courage to. My father didn't look surprised. Of course he didn't. Wherever he was standing now, surprise didn't seem to be a thing that reached him any more. Then that's your answer, he said. That's the door you actually need to walk back through. I felt something shift in the light around us, subtle, like a change in air pressure before a storm you can't yet see. And I understood without being told directly that this conversation was reaching its edge, not because he was leaving, because I was. Will I remember this? I asked him. When I go back, will I remember you said this? He considered the question the way he used to consider a stubborn engine, head tilted, patient in a way that had nothing to do with the man who raised me. Some of it, he said, not all. That's not cruelty, that's mercy. If you remembered everything clearly, you'd spend your life trying to describe it instead of living it. You'd become a man who talks about the light instead of a man who walks differently because of it. I wanted to beg him to let me keep every piece of this. The colour of the light, the exact sound of his voice, the weight of finally hearing him say, "I know." But the same part of me that had refused this place minutes before understood he was right. "One more thing," he said. And for the first time that night, his voice had an edge of something I hadn't heard from him yet. Urgency. Whatever you decide to change, don't wait for another night like this one to do it. You won't get a third. I don't remember agreeing to leave. That's the part that still bothers me, if I'm being honest with you. One moment I was standing in that light with my father, feeling the weight of his last words settle into me. The next, there was a violent, wrenching pressure in my chest, like being pulled backward through a door too small for my body. And then pain, real pain, body pain. The kind you forget exists when you're somewhere without a spine or a heart that has to be shocked back into rhythm. I felt my ribs first. A deep, cracking ache I'd later learn came from compressions, from a nurse named Priya pressing hard enough to break bone to keep blood moving, to a brain that, without her, would have had maybe 4 more minutes. I opened my eyes to fluorescent light and someone's hand still on my chest and a voice saying, "We've got a rhythm, we've got a rhythm, stay with me." I wasn't grateful. I need you to hear that clearly because it's the part people struggle with most. I was furious. Somewhere behind my closed eyes, a version of me was still standing in that light, still hearing my father tell me I wouldn't get a third chance, and here I was, dragged into a body that hurt in 11 new places, surrounded by strangers who'd made a decision without asking whether I wanted it made. The doctor who ran that code, I'll tell you her name later, because what happened between us afterward is its own kind of story, leaned over me once I was stable enough to focus on her face and smiled the exhausted, satisfied smile of someone who'd just done their job well. "You gave us quite a scare," she said, "twice in one night. You're lucky to be here." I didn't have the strength to speak yet. But if I had, I would have told her that luck was the wrong word, that somewhere in the 11 seconds she'd spent shouting orders and shocking my chest back into rhythm, she had made a decision that wasn't hers to make, that she had reached into a conversation I was having with my dead father and yanked me out of it, without any way of understanding what she'd actually interrupted. I know how that sounds. I know it sounds ungrateful, maybe unhinged, to resent the person who kept you alive. I've turned it over 1,000 times since, trying to find simple gratitude, simple relief. I can't find it. What I feel instead is more complicated, and it's taken me 3 years to say, without flinching. I was angry at being saved, not because I wanted to die. I didn't want to die. I wanted to finish a conversation that had already changed the shape of my life, and instead, I was pulled out of it mid-sentence, the way you'd yank a phone away before someone could say goodbye. My wife arrived within the hour, coat thrown on over pajamas, her face bracing for news she'd already rehearsed the whole drive over. She took my hand like she was afraid it might dissolve. "I thought I lost you," she said, "twice." And I looked at her, really looked at her for the first time in longer than I want to admit, and thought about the promise I'd made in that light, the one true thing I'd told my father I'd finally say. I opened my mouth to start, and then a monitor beeped, and a nurse came in to check my vitals, and the moment closed the way moments do in hospitals, where privacy is borrowed and always about to be interrupted. I didn't say it that night. I told myself there would be time. That's the lie every one of us tells, isn't it? There will be time. Tomorrow, when I'm less exhausted. Next week, when the timing is better. I'd just been told by my own father that time was the one thing none of us are guaranteed twice, and within an hour I was already reaching for the same excuse that had cost me 4 years of silence in the first place. The nurse finished her checks. My wife stayed the rest of the night in a chair too small for sleeping, her hand never fully letting go of mine even after her eyes closed near dawn. I lay there watching the ceiling, the same water-stained tile shaped like Florida, except now looking up at it instead of down. It looked different from this side, smaller, less significant than it had felt floating above it. And I remember thinking in the strange, half-lucid hours before sunrise that maybe that was the whole point. Everything looks smaller and more manageable from up there, and the hard, necessary work of living only happens down here in a body that hurts, and a truth that has to be spoken out loud to a person who can actually hear it. I didn't sleep. I lay awake doing math I hadn't done in years, counting the days since I'd told my wife something true and unguarded, since I'd said I love you and actually meant it. The number was higher than I wanted to admit. They kept me for 6 days, 6 days of tests and consultations, and a cardiologist who used the word remarkable so many times it stopped meaning anything. My daughter flew in from Portland on the second day. She's 31, and she came through the door of that room like she'd been running since the minute she booked the flight. She held me for a long time without saying anything, and I let her. And I thought about my father standing in that warm light, and whether he had stood somewhere like this when I was 31, watching me hold my life together with both hands, wishing he knew how to say what he needed to say. I think he had. I think he was always watching in whatever form watching takes, when you're no longer the kind of thing that has eyes. On the 4th day, my wife brought my things from home. She set them on the chair in the corner, and we talked about logistics for a while, the way people talk when they're afraid that stopping means talking about something real. And then she sat down on the edge of the bed, and she looked at her hands for a moment, and she said something I wasn't expecting. "I know you didn't want to come back." I went very still. "Not because I think you wanted to die," she said. "I don't think that, but I know you. I know what that face looks like when you're somewhere else and your body is just going through the motions. And when I got here that first morning and you were lying there with all those wires on you, you looked like a man who was furious to be interrupted." She wasn't crying. She was holding the feeling at arm's length so she could keep talking through it. "I've been watching you be somewhere else for years," she said, "and I've been waiting for you to come back, and I didn't know how to ask you to." The room got very quiet. I thought about my father, about What he'd said about the one true thing I'd promised to finally say, about every morning I'd woken up beside this woman and chosen the comfortable silence over the necessary word. "There's something I have to tell you," I said. She looked up, and I told her. All of it. The year I'd privately decided to leave. The man who had already left in his mind and never packed a bag. Every morning of silence that had been about something specific, and every morning since where I'd chosen not to name it. She didn't speak for a long time. Long enough that I wondered if some truths are better carried alone, if honesty is sometimes just another way of handing someone a weight you've gotten tired of. Then she said quietly, "I know, I've known for a long time. I just needed you to be the one to say it." I don't have words for what moved through me in that moment. Not relief, exactly. Something older than relief, something that felt like the specific ache of setting down something you've been carrying so long you forgot it had a weight. "So what do we do now?" I asked. She looked at me with an expression I hadn't seen on her face in years. Not love exactly. Something more useful than love. Something that looked like a decision being made right there, in real time, by a woman who had been patient far longer than I deserved. "Now," she said, "we figure it out. Together, like we were supposed to." That sentence did not fix everything. There were arguments that followed, sessions with a therapist in a room that smelled like lavender and old carpet, nights when I drove home wondering if opening that door had only let more cold in. But here is what I know, 3 years out. The conversation I had in that light was real. Not in the sense I can prove to a skeptic, real in the sense that it changed me. I am not the same man who went to sleep complaining about indigestion and woke up on a kitchen floor. Something shifted, and whatever shifted has not shifted back. I know my father was there. I know the exact way he said "I know," and the shape of the smile that followed, and the quality of patience he never found while he was alive. I know these things the way I know the weight of my own hand. I still haven't fully forgiven her. The forgiveness is in progress. It's the slow kind. The kind you find in pieces, the way you find something lost in a coat you haven't worn all season, a little more each time you reach in. But I know she was right, because the conversation I needed most was not the one with my dead father in that warm light. As necessary as that one was, it was the one in a hospital room on the 4th day, with a woman who told me she'd already known and had been quietly holding the space for me to finally say it. That conversation could only happen here, in a body, in a room, with wires on my chest and a water stain on the ceiling above me, and I almost missed it. There is one more thing I haven't told you yet. I told you about my father. I told you about the light. I told you about the conversation in the hospital room on the 4th day, and what my wife said, and what I finally said back. But there is a moment from the 6th day, the morning they discharged me, that I have held back because I wasn't sure how to say it without it sounding like the kind of thing you say at the end of a story to tie everything together neatly. And I'm not interested in neat. I am interested in true. The doctor who saved my life came in to sign my discharge paperwork. I had been avoiding her, not consciously, but in the particular way you avoid someone when you don't yet know how to be in the same room with what they represent. She was younger than I had expected, mid-40s maybe, with the specific kind of tiredness behind the eyes that belongs to people who regularly put their hands on strangers and make decisions that the strangers can't make for themselves. She sat down across from me and went through the forms, and then she looked up and said, "I want to ask you something, and you don't have to answer." I told her to go ahead. "When we were working on you the second time," she said, "there was a moment, about 11 seconds in, before we got rhythm back, where I was certain we'd lost you. Not statistically uncertain, certain. And then you came back. I've been doing this for 17 years, and I've learned not to look for reasons, but you looked at me when you opened your eyes, and the expression on your face was not what I usually see." She paused, choosing her words carefully, the way someone does when they're about to say something their training didn't prepare them for. "Most people look relieved," she said, "or frightened, or confused. You looked like someone who had just lost an argument they meant to win." I didn't say anything. "I just wanted you to know," she said, "that whatever happened in those 11 seconds, I'm glad you came back from it, whatever it was." She stood to leave, and something in me rose before I could stop it. "Her name is Priya," I said, "the nurse who reached for the crash cart. She knocked a water cup off the tray table. It rolled under the bed instead of breaking. I watched it from somewhere near the light fixture. I didn't know her name then. I learned it later, when I asked." The doctor went very still. She looked at me for a long moment without speaking. Then she set the discharge paperwork back on the tray table and sat back down. "If you've made it this far with me, I want to invite you to subscribe to the channel and follow us every day. Stories like this one are what this channel exists for. Not to convince you of anything, but to sit with you in the questions that the loudest parts of life never leave room for. Subscribe and I'll be here every time you need that room. Because here's what the doctor said next, and why it's taken me 3 years to be able to tell it without my voice going somewhere I can't fully control." She said, "Priya told me about the cup. She mentioned it in debrief because she felt terrible. She said she looked for it after the code and couldn't find it. It was still under the bed when housekeeping came in that morning. She looked at me with the careful expression of a scientist standing at the edge of something her instruments weren't built to measure. A long silence settled between us, the kind that has its own texture in a hospital room, where silence usually means something is being absorbed. "I don't know what to do with that," she said finally. "Neither do I told her. "I've stopped trying." She nodded once, slowly, the way you nod when someone has said the only true thing and you recognize it as such. Then she signed the paperwork without another word and left. I sat there for a while after she was gone, looking at the ceiling, the Florida tile, looking up at it one last time from below, from the right side of things, from the side where you still have to make the bed in the morning and call your daughter back and sit across from your wife in the kitchen and say something true, even when it's easier not to. That is the honest answer 3 years out. I have stopped trying to put it in a category. I have stopped needing it to fit somewhere that makes sense inside the framework I was handed. My father is gone and I saw him, and he told me something true, and I came back and told the truth to someone who needed to hear it, and the water cup was under the bed. That's what I carried back through whatever door I returned through, into a body that hurt in 11 new places, into a life I hadn't finished living yet. It isn't proof of anything, I know that, but it is not nothing. 3 years. That's how long I've been carrying this story before I finally knew how to tell it. Not because it took me 3 years to understand what happened. I understood most of it within the first few weeks, in the way you understand something that bypasses the part of your brain that argues with things. I knew what I saw. I knew what I heard. I knew what the cup under the bed meant. What took 3 years was learning how to live inside the understanding instead of just orbiting it. My wife and I are still together. I want to say that plainly, because I know some of you are wondering, and because the answer deserves to be said without drama. Still together, and more honest with each other than we have been at any point in 26 years, which is not always comfortable and is not always kind, but is real in a way that the comfortable silence never was. We still have mornings where we pass each other in the kitchen without saying much. But now it's a different kind of quiet, the kind that doesn't have anything hidden inside it. My daughter calls more often. I think she sensed something shift, even from Portland, the way children of a certain age sense things about their parents that they can't yet name. She doesn't ask about what happened in the hospital, she just calls. I have not spoken to my father again. I want to be honest about that too, because I know some of you are hoping I'll tell you the door stayed open, that I've had conversations with him in dreams or at the foot of the bed or in the specific quality of light that sometimes falls through the kitchen window on Sunday mornings. I can't tell you that. What I can tell you is that the sense of being watched, of being accompanied, has not left me. It's quieter than it was in that room, steadier, less like a presence and more like a temperature, like the room is a few degrees warmer than it used to be. That might be grief doing what grief does best, finding a way to live in the house with you, rearranging itself into something bearable. I don't know. I've stopped needing to know. I think about my father's question most mornings, the one he asked in that warm light, offered as gently as a man like him was capable of offering anything. Are you finished? Or are you just afraid to start again? I am not finished. I know that now in a way I didn't know it the night I lay alone in a hospital room at 52, listening to the monitor and watching the ceiling and telling myself, there would be time. There is still time. Not infinite time, not the comfortable illusion of unlimited time I walked around with for the first 5 decades of my life, but time, real time, the kind you can feel the edges of, which turns out to make it more valuable, not less. I go for longer walks now. Not for my heart, though my cardiologist approves, because I spent a lot of years in motion without actually moving, and I'm trying to learn the difference. Some mornings I sit on the back porch before my wife wakes up, the way I sat there the night before the cardiac arrest, staring at the dark, except now I know what I was feeling that night, that strange sense of being watched that I explained away as exhaustion. Now I know it had a name and a face and the specific patience of a man who ran out of time to be impatient. I'm not afraid of dying the way I used to be. That's not what I brought back. What I brought back is closer to its opposite, a specific, quiet urgency about living, about the conversation you keep meaning to have, about the thing you're carrying that doesn't have to be carried alone, about the person sleeping in the next room who has been waiting with more patience than you deserved for you to come back. Whatever it is for you, the thing you already know and have been too tired to say. Don't wait for your own version of a Tuesday night and a kitchen floor and a monitor going flat. If this story reached something in you, if some part of it felt like something you've been carrying alone, I'd be grateful if you'd subscribe to this channel so we can keep having this kind of conversation. Share this with 5 people who might need it, and leave me a comment below. Not just a word, but something real. Tell me what you're still carrying. Tell me what question you'd want answered if someone gave you 11 seconds and a warm light to find it in. That's how I choose what to tell next. That's how we find each other. My father told me he'd been there every time I needed him. I just hadn't been quiet enough to notice. I'm trying to be quieter now. Maybe that's all any of us can do.